So I'm going to get into religious trauma in response to an atheist who's always battering the best Christians online. I know when they're going after them that it's because they sense something is right about them and it's bothering them. They don't go after the bad ones, they go after the very best. And that means that it's specifically those things that caused him to stop believing, which it wasn't because of religious trauma, it was because he didn't like the teachings. So, we're going to speak specifically of religious trauma today, though. Three clear examples. You had Jeremiah, a prophet during the fall of Jerusalem, was severely mistreated by both the priests and also the king. He was speaking only the truth. He read the Torah. He interpreted it. If we're sinning, we're going to get captured. So we will have compassion from our captors if we just give up our government to them, because they will rule, in a sense, more benevolently than Jehoiakim or Zedekiah, which is true because they were practicing human sacrifice and were very sexually immoral. Babylon at that time was still worshiping Samus, so basically they would have been better suited for ruling over Judah and Jerusalem, which surprisingly it's when they started worshiping sin that Babylon became weak and therefore submitted to Cyrus willingly too. Babylon willingly submitted to Cyrus, not the elites, but the people. They loved Cyrus because they did not want to worship sin, which is a true story. You find that in Herodotus. Another thing is, of course, Jesus himself. Jesus himself was poorly mistreated by the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees, very poorly mistreated by them, and I don't think he had more resistance from anyone beside them, which is something that you see if you're a true Christian. You do get resistance you get friendly fire. A lot of times that's your worst critics are the friendly fire. And unfortunately that's a fact, is that you get attacked by a bunch of heretics and apostates and even people who seem pious, they just are jealous of your ministry and they know you're telling the truth because they know the Bible better than anybody else and they just don't want to admit it. This is what happened with Jesus. They didn't want to admit he was the Son of God because it's in there. It's like he's fulfilling all these prophecies, and we're just like, not us but them. They're just like, we don't like this because it's challenging our worldview. So Jesus got a lot of resistance from the religious elite who should have accepted him. Another example is Paul. Paul was very much a religious authority in the Jews, and he persecuted the church. He killed Stephen. He signed Christians' death warrants and sent them to the Colosseums and to death camps and things like that. Paul signed off on their death. He was basically like Hitler. He didn't spill the blood himself, but he was the one signing the death warrants. It was his ultimate plan to have the Christians pogromed, and that was Paul's genuine design, was to just wipe all of us out. That was his design, and he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and he became a Christian. So another example outside of the scripture is the 16th and 17th century saints who, after the Protestant Reformation, they were doing full immersion baptism again, and the Catholic Church cruelly treated them. They say in the time of the Reformation there was 3 million Christians killed just in Spain. So we can assume that this was happening all over the Catholic territories. There were millions and millions of Christians being killed. During Rome, it was estimated that about 6 million to 11 million Christians were killed under the Roman Empire. So, the fact of the matter is, and of course, during the Catholic time, you had the Waldenses and the Albigenses that were essentially Anabaptists before they were Anabaptists, and they were being persecuted too. And also the Coptic Church was highly persecuted by the Catholics. They destroy all their ancient texts, which is probably some of the original Gospels, like the original Hebrew, were destroyed by the Catholic Church because they didn't like the Coptic Church, So it's to be expected that the worst forms of persecution come from actual Christians. I mean, who's destroying the evidence for Scripture? Who has it? First off, it's the Catholic Church. They're destroying it, And I'm not saying Catholics are bad. I'm just saying there's a contingency of them that are not very productive. Just like there's a contingency of Catholics that are very productive. It's like in the Protestant sects, there's good Protestant sects and there's bad ones. There's progressive Christians who are an abomination and they have every bad idea that humanity has ever had all rolled up into one movement. And you have the traditional church preaching what the gospel has been from day one. So, that's a fact. You have the worst forms of persecution come from Christians, supposed Christians. You have the false church and the true church in Nazi Germany. False church persecuted the true church. The true church had to go underground, and they couldn't be affiliated with the government because they knew it was just that bad. It's just, you have to understand that religious trauma is dealt with in church history and also in the prophets and also in the gospel. It's a consistent theme among God's martyrs and God's story that humans have to know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, and the true faith is a beautiful thing if you understand it. The true faith is a very beautiful thing. But you have to find it. And if you don't, then your foundation isn't laid. As Jesus says, build your foundation upon the rock. I would say those 12 foundation stones of heaven are the rock. Build your foundation upon the apostles and their teachings and church traditions that elaborate on it through sermons and hymns and hagiographies and martyrologies and, epistles written by early church fathers and epistles written by saints and of course the evidence. You can search the evidence. There's plenty of that too. It's just very hidden. It's a very true thing that God is real. It's well documented, and it's a fact that if we fall off the faith, it's not because of religious trauma. It's because we have not built our foundation upon the rock. As Jesus says, if our foundation is built upon the rock, when the waves come, we will not be washed down. If you build your foundation upon the sand, then it will.